Welcome to today's study. Humanity has literally always had this deep, burning fascination with unpacking the end times, right? We pore over ancient texts, desperately trying to figure out exactly where we stand on this grand prophetic clock. Well, today we are diving headfirst into a wildly intricate and mathematically fascinating timeline put together by the YouTube channel Repoman 64. Just a heads up, a link is below in the description box, so you can definitely go check out their exact calculations for yourself. But before we get totally into the weeds here, the Gospels Compared says prayers for the Watchman channels are very much appreciated and give a hype and like, please. Alright, so in this study, we're going to meticulously break down how this channel uses biblical math to build their prophecy. We'll lay out their full summary completely neutrally, diving into the numbers, the exact dates, and the theology, just to really grasp the mechanics of what they're claiming and pinpoint the exact year they believe absolutely changes everything.
So let's jump right in by asking the million-dollar question driving this whole study. Are we sitting in a critical 40-day prophetic waiting period right now? The channel suggests that believers might literally be in a highly significant prophetic pause as we speak. It's a super urgent timeline. And look, for folks following these calculations, this isn't just some casual curiosity. It feels like standing right on the edge of a precipice. The study examines our current calendar incredibly closely and asks a heavy question. Is a major biblical event right at our doorstep, acting as a final, ticking countdown for all of humanity?
Section 1. The 40-day window.
According to the channel, the number 40 is intrinsically hardwired into the Bible as this period of extreme testing, waiting, and divine prep work. Think about the huge historical precedents they're relying on here. You've got Noah and his family, right? Stuck on that ark, waiting out the rain for 40 days and 40 nights for the waters of judgment to finally recede. Then you have the entire nation of Israel, forced to wander that harsh, unforgiving desert for 40 years before they could finally cross into the promised land. And of course, Jesus himself retreated into the wilderness, fasting and battling relentless temptation for exactly 40 days before starting his public ministry. The source passionately argues that this deeply ingrained pattern is repeating right now in our modern era.
Tracking with that pattern, the channel actually maps out a super specific 40-day window stretching from August 15th all the way to September 24th. In their math, August 15th marks the historical anniversary of Jesus' baptism. Now, if you count exactly 40 days forward from that pivotal moment, boom, you land right on the Day of Atonement. That's the absolute holiest day of the year in biblical tradition, a day all about final judgment and profound cleansing. But get this, along this 40-day journey, they're watching a couple of other key dates too. They peg September 11th as the literal first day of creation, and then right after that, September 15th, which lines up with the Feast of Trumpets. In eschatology circles, the Feast of Trumpets is basically viewed as the ultimate prophetic alarm clock waking up the world.
Section 2. Math of the Jubilees. Okay, so the absolute beating heart of their entire theory is this concept of the Jubilee. Now, if you're familiar with theology, you know there's this massive ongoing debate about whether a Jubilee cycle is 49 years or 50 years. Well, Repoman 64 comes down hard on this. A Jubilee is strictly a 49-year cycle, no exceptions. They pull this directly from Leviticus, 7 times 7 years. The channel is super insistent that there is no independent floating 50th year just hanging out. Instead, that 50th year simply overlaps and acts as year number 1 of the next 49-year block. Getting this math strictly at 49 is absolutely crucial. Over thousands of years, if you added an extra year every cycle, you'd completely wreck the timeline. So this strict 49-year rule is the bedrock for everything we're about to look at.
Having that strict math is what allows the source to take a 6,000-year biblical timeline and sync it up with our modern calendar. Step 1. Track the years from creation, which they calculate kicked off precisely in 4003 BC. But step 2 is where the theology gets really fascinating. The channel says you have to deduct the 33.5 years that Jesus was physically alive on earth. The logic here is wild. They argue that because God was physically, literally, walking the earth during those specific years, the prophetic clock of humanity's exile away from God basically hit pause. By completely stripping those 33.5 years out of the 6,000-year total, the Jubilee math ships perfectly, bringing their calculations smack into our present day.
This calculation gives them a seriously precise count. The study details that exactly 123 Jubilees span from the very moment of creation right up to today. They break it down like this. 53 Jubilees passed from creation until the very second Joshua led the Israelites across the river and into the Promised Land. From that huge triumphant entry, exactly 70 more Jubilees have passed to get us to today. 53 plus 70, giving us that grand total of 123. According to their study, this mathematical perfection creates this audible click in the timeline, positioning humanity right on the absolute razor's edge of a prophetic threshold.
Section 3. The 2030 Tribulation Timeline. All right, so with the Jubilee foundation poured, the Watchman's puzzle connects the crucifixion in 30 AD directly to the year 2030. How? Well, the channel leans heavily on that prophetic concept from Peter's writings, that a day is as 1,000 years to the Lord. By taking exactly 2 prophetic days, meaning 2,000 literal years, and counting from the cross in 30 AD, the channel lands squarely on 2030. They mark 2030 as this incredibly severe milestone, claiming it's going to be the exact midpoint of the tribulation. And to add to the tension, they factor in the very real Apophis asteroid. Scientists say this asteroid is making a crazy close pass by Earth in 2029. The channel looks at that cosmic event as a terrifying precursor, kicking off the chaos just before everything climaxes in 2030.
Let's get specific. The source claims that on the Feast of Passover in 2030, a huge prophecy from Hosea 6:2 will be fulfilled. That verse says, "After 2 days will he revive us." They argue this is the exact terrifying moment when Satan will fully indwell the Antichrist, literally possessing him the way he did Judas Iscariot. Then, the Antichrist is going to boldly march into the temple and claim to be God. At this horrifying moment, which is exactly 2,000 years to the day after the true Messiah was on the cross, the channel asserts a remnant of the Jewish people will suddenly realize who Jesus truly was. Facing unimaginable persecution, 1/3 of them will dramatically flee into the wilderness, heading to the rock city of Petra for divine safety. This leads into a really specific, non-traditional take on the book of Revelation. Usually, you hear timelines that stretch out the opening of the seals over years and years, but this source asserts the seals open way earlier and they totally overlap. They believe the infamous 4 horsemen of the apocalypse just ride continuously throughout the entire 7-year period, bringing non-stop war, famine, and death. Because the chaos hits the fan immediately, the martyrs of the 5th seal are already waiting under the altar super early in the timeline. Logically, that means all the massive cosmic disturbances, the earthquakes, and the pitch-black skies of the 6th seal happen very early in the tribulation, rather than saving it as some grand finale at the very end.
Right in the middle of that terrifying early 6th seal chaos, the channel notes that the 144,000 Israelites we see in Revelation are officially sealed on earth. They get this divine earthly force field so they can survive the coming wrath and preach to a totally broken world. But here's where the channel draws a massive distinction. They stress that the bride, meaning the true grace-saved church, will have already bypassed this earthly nightmare completely. The bride is safely tucked away in heaven before these catastrophic seal judgments even begin to drop. It's a profound difference between getting earthly protection during the storm versus getting a heavenly escape before it even starts.
Section 4. Dispensational Prayer.
We definitely want to impartially report on the intense theological dividing line the channel uses to separate these two groups. According to the source, the tribulation saints, the ones left behind to face the apocalypse, are actually believers who mistakenly relied on their own merit. They put their trust in their own good works, their charitable deeds, maybe their flawless church attendance. Because of that deeply rooted pride, the channel argues, they literally have to be left behind to endure the refining fire of the tribulation to purify their faith. But in stark contrast, the bride brings absolutely zero pride to the table. They rely 100% on the grace of Jesus. And it's exactly that pure, unearned reliance that allows them to escape the tribulation entirely.
To really drive this theological point home, the study breaks down the Lord's Prayer in Luke chapter 11 using a super strict dispensational lens. Essentially, the channel claims that different lines of this famous prayer actually apply to completely different groups of people living in totally different time periods. For example, "Give us this day our daily bread." They say that applies quite literally to the tribulation saints. During the apocalypse, they'll be starving, and they will literally need to rely on God's physical provision just to survive another day. But the phrase "deliver us from evil" or "deliver us from the evil time" is identified as the specific, desperate cry of the bride. It's a plea asking God for a pre-tribulation rapture, begging to bypass the judgment entirely through His grace.
The source traces this all the way back to the book of Genesis, specifically highlighting this verse where God warns Cain. If you remember the story, Cain brought the fruit of his own labor, his own agricultural works, to God, and God rejected it. God straight up warned him that sin was lying at his door. The channel fiercely argues that this ancient warning applies directly to modern believers today and to those future tribulation saints who think their mechanical, religious works are going to save them. Just like He warned Cain, God is warning them that a works-based faith, one that's totally missing a complete surrender to the blood sacrifice, is ultimately and entirely rejected by heaven.
Section 5. the final warning.
All right, so this study takes all these incredibly complex numbers, exact dates, and Jubilee calculations, and it ultimately boils the whole thing down to a very direct, very urgent challenge for you, the listener. The channel intensely urges viewers to drop any lingering pride right now. If you are secretly relying on your theology degree, your baptism certificate, your perfect Sunday attendance, or even your massive charitable donations to save you, well, the channel argues you are in grave spiritual danger. You've got to completely abandon any sense of works-based security. You must realize your absolute desperate reliance on Jesus alone, and you literally have to approach God with nothing in your hands, just a broken and contrite heart.
The overarching, totally inescapable message of Repoman 64 is just this. Salvation absolutely cannot be earned by human hands. There is nothing you can bring to the table that's going to impress God. It's this terrifying but honestly beautiful realization that without the finished work of the cross, you are completely lost. True salvation, at least according to this study, can only be received by fully admitting your total spiritual bankruptcy. It's only by throwing yourself at the mercy of the court and letting yourself be covered entirely by Jesus' unmerited grace that you can ever hope to be counted as part of the bride that escapes the coming storm.
We're going to end this study with a really provocative, deeply personal thought pulled directly from the source material. Ask yourself, will you trust in your own mechanical works and human effort, or will you come with a broken heart and rely completely on the finished work of the cross before this prophetic window closes? We really hope this deep dive helped clarify these complex timelines for you. A big thanks for the Gospels Compared members for helping this channel produce fruit.